She walked in late, and the room decided who she was. The doors opened 10 minutes late. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for people to notice. The kind of late that makes whispers ripple before footsteps do. A hush rolled through the ballroom as the woman stepped inside, her heels echoing softly against polished marble. Conversations dipped. A few heads turned. A few eyebrows lifted. Someone near the front glanced at their watch with visible irritation. Late was unforgivable in rooms like this. She paused just inside the doorway, breathing once, steadying herself. Her posture was straight, her shoulders relaxed, but there was something unmistakable in her eyes. Something calm, something deep, something that didn't belong to someone who felt small. Still, the room had already judged her. She wasn't dressed poorly. But she wasn't dressed loudly either. Her suit was elegant but understated, tailored with precision rather than flash. No diamonds. No glitter. No visible signals of excess wealth. Her hair was pulled back neatly, not styled to command attention. In a room built on spectacle, subtlety looked like weakness. A few guests exchanged looks. One woman near the front table leaned toward her companion and murmured something behind her hand. A man near the stage scoffed quietly and shook his head. She doesn't even look like she belongs here. The charity gala for the Stanton Global Initiative was not a place for mistakes. It was invitation only, carefully curated, and ruthlessly hierarchical. CEOs, venture capitalists, politicians, old money families, everyone in attendance knew exactly where they ranked and more importantly who ranked below them. And the woman who walked in late? They ranked her very low. Across the room, standing near the podium, was Richard Stanton himself. Founder. Billionaire. Philanthropist. The man whose name was etched into hospitals, university wings, and international aid programs. Richard Stanton did not miss details. He noticed everything. And when he saw her, his jaw tightened. He glanced at his assistant, who immediately leaned in. "Who is that?" Richard asked quietly, his tone sharp. His assistant scanned the room, frowning. I'm not sure, sir. I don't see her on the primary donor list." Richard exhaled slowly through his nose. Of course. Another one. Another person who thought connections mattered more than respect for time. Another person who thought they could arrive late and still be taken seriously. He straightened his jacket and turned slightly toward the microphone, waiting for the woman to find a seat. The longer she stood there, the more his irritation grew. Time to Richard Stanton was sacred. And she had wasted it. The woman began walking toward the center tables, her gaze steady, unhurried. She didn't rush. She didn't apologize to the room with her body language. That alone irritated some people. Confidence without permission always does. A waiter accidentally stepped into her path, clearly flustered. "Oh, sorry, ma'am. Your table?" She smiled gently. "It's all right. Take your time." Her voice was calm, warm, controlled. The waiter blinked, startled by her kindness, then nodded and moved aside. Several people noticed. Some mistook it for naivety. Others mistook it for arrogance. Richard Stanton watched it all with thinly veiled disapproval. "She doesn't even look embarrassed," he muttered. "She should be," his colleague beside him replied. "Walking in late like that? Shows a lack of discipline." Richard nodded. "Exactly." The woman reached her table and sat down quietly, smoothing her jacket, folding her hands in her lap. She glanced briefly toward the stage, then toward the crowd as if taking in the energy of the room, not with hunger but with understanding. She didn't pull out her phone. She didn't fidget. She waited. Richard Stanton stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. "Thank you for being here tonight. As always, your punctuality reflects your commitment to the causes we support." A few polite chuckles followed. His eyes flicked, almost involuntarily, toward the woman seated near the center. She met his gaze. Not defiantly. Not apologetically. Just directly. Something about that unsettled him. He looked away. "As you know," he continued, "tonight's event is about responsibility. About leadership. About understanding that impact requires discipline." Another glance toward her. She was listening intently. Too intently. That irritated him even more. As the program continued, speakers took the stage, board members, donors, public figures. Applause rose and fell on cue. Glasses clinked. Checks were promised. Numbers were announced. But beneath it all, the undercurrent remained. Who is she? And why is she here? Whispers grew bolder as the night went on. "I heard she's someone's assistant." "No, I think she works in logistics." "Maybe she's a +1 who got lost." She doesn't look rich enough to be sitting there. The comments were quiet but cruel, delivered with smiles and wine-scented confidence. She heard some of them. She always did. She didn't react. Richard Stanton finished his opening remarks and stepped away from the podium, accepting handshakes and compliments. As he moved through the crowd, the silence after her name was called. For 3 full seconds no one clapped. Not because they didn't hear the number, but because their minds refused to accept it. $30 million did not come from people who arrived late. It came from names already etched into walls, from faces everyone recognized, from people who made sure the room noticed them long before they noticed anyone else. And yet, the woman they had dismissed, quiet, understated, almost invisible, was standing. Slowly the ballroom filled with sound. Applause erupted in uneven waves, hesitant at first, then louder, more desperate, as people realized silence would expose them. Chairs scraped against the floor as guests half stood, unsure whether a full standing ovation was expected. Richard Stanton remained frozen. His eyes were locked on her. No, on the reality rearranging itself in front of him. She walked toward the stage with measured steps, not basking in attention, not shrinking from it either. The lights caught her face now, revealing details no one had bothered to notice before. The calm certainty in her expression, the quiet authority in the way she carried herself. She did not smile. She did not wave. She acknowledged the applause with a simple nod. Richard felt something twist in his chest. He had built an empire by reading people quickly, by knowing who mattered and who didn't. Tonight he realized he had been catastrophically wrong. The MC stepped aside as she approached the microphone. "Thank you," she said softly, and the room fell silent again. Not forced this time. "My name is Eleanor Hale." A ripple went through the crowd. Some recognized it instantly. Most didn't. Richard did. And the recognition hit him like a blow. Eleanor Hale. The private investor whose foundation had quietly funded community rebuilds across 3 continents. The name attached to several anonymous endowments that had saved failing school systems and restored neglected neighborhoods. Projects that refused publicity and rejected corporate branding. She was a ghost in philanthropic circles. And she was standing 10 feet away from him. "I apologize for my late arrival," Eleanor continued. Not as an excuse, but as context. Her gaze swept the room, unhurried, observant. "I was delayed at a site inspection," she said. "One of the community schools this initiative supports experienced a structural failure today. We had children learning in rooms where the ceilings were no longer safe." A murmur rippled through the room. Eleanor's voice remained steady. "I stayed until the last student was relocated." That felt more urgent than punctuality. Every word landed with precision. Richard swallowed. She turned slightly toward him. "Mr. Stanton," she said. The room collectively inhaled. "Yes," he replied, his voice tighter than he intended. "You spoke earlier about discipline," Eleanor said calmly. "About leadership. About respect for time." She paused. "I agree with you." The pause stretched. "But leadership," she continued, "is also about knowing when to be late for the right reasons." The silence was suffocating. No accusation. No raised voice. Just truth delivered without cruelty. Richard felt heat rise to his face. "And respect," she added, "is not something we demand by status. It's something we demonstrate through action." She turned back to the room. "My contribution tonight is not a gesture," Eleanor said. "It's a commitment. $30 million to ensure this initiative reaches the communities it was designed for, not just the ones that look good in annual reports." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor smiled then, but it wasn't warm. It was resolute. "I requested anonymity because I wanted to observe," she said. "I wanted to see how people treat someone they believe holds no power." The words sliced cleanly. Richard felt them land squarely on his chest. "I arrived late on purpose," Eleanor continued. "I dressed plainly on purpose. I listened quietly on purpose." She looked directly at Richard again. "And I learned a great deal." No one breathed. "I learned who values contribution over appearance," she said. "And who values hierarchy over humanity." Richard felt every eye in the room flick toward him. He straightened his shoulders, forcing composure. "Miss Hale," he said, stepping forward, "I owe you an apology." She regarded him carefully. "Do you?" she asked gently. The question was devastating in its simplicity. "Yes," he said. "I judged you unfairly." She nodded. "You did." The honesty disarmed him. "And," he added, voice quieter now, "you're right. I mistook punctuality for character." Eleanor held his gaze. Many people do, she said. The room exhaled slowly. I don't accept your apology on my behalf, Eleanor continued. I accept it on behalf of everyone who will never stand on this stage, who are judged every day before they're heard. Her words settled deep. Then she stepped away from the microphone. The applause this time was thunderous. Not polite. Not obligatory. Genuine. Richard found himself clapping too, harder than anyone. But the applause didn't quiet the storm inside him. As the evening continued, the atmosphere had changed. Conversation shifted. Eyes followed Eleanor everywhere she went. People approached her with forced humility, eager smiles, rehearsed admiration. She accepted none of it. She spoke instead with staff members. Volunteers. The caterer who had spilled wine earlier. The waiter she'd smiled at when she arrived. Richard watched from across the room. For the first time in decades he felt small. Later he approached her again, more cautiously this time. You embarrassed me tonight, he said quietly. She met his eyes. No. You embarrassed yourself. He nodded. Fair. A beat passed. I would like to learn from you, he said. She studied him. That depends, she replied. On whether you want to learn, or just recover. Richard swallowed. For the first time, he said, I don't know the difference. Eleanor's expression softened, just slightly. That, she said, is where learning begins. Across the power reveals. And then it tests. The applause eventually faded. The music resumed. The gala returned to its polished rhythm. But something fundamental had shifted beneath the chandeliers. Richard Stanton stood near the edge of the ballroom, nursing a glass of water he hadn't touched. Conversations flowed around him, yet none of it reached his ears. His mind replayed the evening on a brutal loop. Her entrance, his irritation, the assumptions he'd made without even realizing he was making them. He had built his life on control. Tonight he had lost it in the most public way possible. Across the room, Eleanor Hale sat with a group of people who had not approached her earlier. Local educators, nonprofit coordinators, city planners whose work rarely made headlines. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was measured, thoughtful, practical. No grandstanding. No ego. Richard watched her laugh softly at something a middle-aged woman said, her posture relaxed, her attention fully present. That, more than the donation, unsettled him. Power usually demanded space. Eleanor made space. Richard's assistant approached him cautiously. Sir? The board would like to speak with you. Privately. He nodded. The boardroom upstairs was smaller than the ballroom but far less forgiving. Frosted glass walls, minimalist design, no distractions. 8 people sat around the table, all of them influential, all of them accustomed to being unquestioned. Until tonight. That, one board member said bluntly, was not on the agenda. Richard took his seat. No. It wasn't. You challenged a donor, another added. Publicly. Richard didn't argue. You risked the credibility of this initiative, a third said. Richard leaned forward. No, he said quietly. I risked my pride. And I deserved what happened. The room went still. They weren't used to that tone from him. She exposed a blind spot, Richard continued. One we all share. A woman at the table frowned. Are you suggesting we did something wrong? Yes, Richard replied. I am. The word landed like a dropped glass. We evaluated her worth before we knew her name, he said. Before we knew her contribution. Before we knew anything. Silence stretched. One board member scoffed. She set a trap. No, Richard said. She held up a mirror. The meeting ended without resolution. Richard left feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Downstairs the gala was winding down. Guests filtered toward the exits, still buzzing about the reveal, still replaying the moment Karma walked across the stage. Eleanor stood near the terrace doors looking out at the city lights. Richard approached slowly, deliberately. I've been thinking, he said. She didn't turn. That's dangerous. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. You make it look easy. It's not, she replied. It's just necessary. He stood beside her, hands resting on the railing. I built this foundation to do good, he said. But somewhere along the way I started confusing visibility with impact. Eleanor nodded. That happens when power isn't questioned. He swallowed. I'd like to change that. She turned to him now. Change doesn't start with statements, she said. It starts with consequences. I'm listening. Good, she said. Because this part isn't comfortable. Richard exhaled slowly. You host events like this to showcase generosity, Eleanor continued. But many of the programs you fund are filtered through layers of branding and control that dilute their effectiveness. He didn't interrupt. You decide which communities are presentable, she said. Which stories are marketable. That's not charity. That's curation. The words cut deep because they were accurate. I want you to step back, Eleanor said. From decision-making. Temporarily. His head snapped toward her. Step back. Yes. Let the people doing the work lead. That would be seen as weakness. She met his gaze evenly. Or as integrity. A long silence passed. 3 months, she added. No veto power. No rebranding. No press. Richard stared out at the city. Everything in him resisted. And yet, 3 months, he repeated. And then? Then you decide whether control matters more than results. He nodded slowly. All right, he said. I'll do it. Eleanor studied him, searching for hesitation. Finding none. Good, she said. Because I'm not the only one watching. He frowned. Who else? The communities, she replied. The staff you overlook. The people who arrive late because they're carrying heavier burdens than you can see. Richard felt something shift again, deeper this time. A transformation not fueled by embarrassment, but by responsibility. As they re-entered the ballroom, a staff member rushed toward them. Ms. Hale, she said breathlessly. There's an issue. Eleanor's expression sharpened. What kind? A family from East Harbor, the woman said. Their housing grant was denied last month. They're here. When power stops performing and starts protecting. The family from East Harbor sat at a small table near the back of the ballroom, stiff and uncertain, as if any wrong movement might undo the fragile permission they'd just been given to stay. The father kept his hands folded tightly together. The mother held her daughter close, whispering reassurances that sounded more like prayers. Around them the room buzzed. People noticed. They always noticed when the usual order was disrupted. Richard Stanton stood nearby, watching the scene unfold with a knot in his chest. He knew the file. He had skimmed it weeks ago, barely slowing down as his staff summarized the recommendation. Grant denied. Insufficient metrics. High risk. He hadn't asked what those words meant for the people behind them. Eleanor Hale pulled out a chair and sat across from the parents, lowering herself to their level instead of summoning them to hers. She listened as they explained how the building they lived in had been sold, how the promised relocation assistance never arrived, how their daughter's school was now 2 bus rides away. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't glance around to see who was watching. Richard felt the weight of every past shortcut he'd taken settle on his shoulders. This shouldn't have happened, Eleanor said quietly when they finished. The mother shook her head. They said we didn't fit the criteria. Eleanor smiled gently. Criteria are supposed to serve people, not erase them. She stood and turned to Richard. Get the full review committee, she said. Tonight. Some nearby donors stiffened. Richard didn't hesitate. Now, he said to his assistant. All of them. The assistant blinked. Sir, it's nearly midnight. Richard's voice was calm but immovable. Then it's nearly time. Word spread quickly. Phones came out. Whispers turned into speculation. What started as a gala was becoming something else entirely. The committee gathered in a side lounge, 5 professionals who prided themselves on efficiency and objectivity. Eleanor stood at the head of the room. Richard stood beside her, noticeably not at the front. Walk us through the denial, Eleanor said. One committee member cleared his throat. Based on our scoring model, the family's case didn't meet sustainability thresholds. Eleanor tilted her head. Explain sustainability. He hesitated. Long-term return on investment. Eleanor nodded. And how do you measure the return on keeping a child in her school? Silence. Another member spoke up. We can't fund every case. True, Eleanor said. But you can see every case. She turned to Richard. This system doesn't fail because it's cruel. It fails because it's distant. Richard nodded slowly. Eleanor faced the committee again. Effective immediately, this model is suspended. The room stiffened. That's not standard procedure, someone said. No, Eleanor replied. It's better. Richard stepped forward. She has my full authority. The words echoed. The committee members exchanged uneasy looks. And, Eleanor added, the family's grant is approved. Retroactively. The father's breath caught. The mother pressed her hand to her mouth. The little girl smiled. The moment wasn't loud, but it was seismic. By the time the family left, escorted not by security but by staff members who now treated them with visible respect. The energy in the ballroom had shifted again. This time it wasn't awe. It was accountability. People were watching themselves. The donors who had laughed earlier now avoided Eleanor's gaze. The ones who approached did so carefully, thoughtfully, asking questions instead of offering praise. Richard felt exposed. And strangely relieved. Later that night, as the last guest departed, Eleanor and Richard stood alone near the entrance. "This will cost you," Eleanor said. He nodded. "I know. Some donors will pull out. I know. Some board members will push back." He exhaled. "I know." She studied him. "Then why do it?" He didn't answer immediately. "Because for the first time in my life," he thought, "I'm not pretending. I don't want my legacy to be a list of buildings," he said finally. "I want it to be a line people didn't fall through." Eleanor's expression softened. "That," she said, "is the right answer." As they stepped outside, reporters waited behind barriers, drawn by rumors, by the unusual length of the event, by whispers of something unexpected happening inside. Microphones were raised. Cameras flashed. "Mr. Stanton," someone called. "Care to comment on the controversy tonight?" Richard paused. For years he would have deflected. Tonight he didn't. "Yes," he said. The crowd leaned in. "We learned something tonight," Richard said. "About assumptions. About power. About who gets heard." Eleanor stood beside him, silent. "And starting tomorrow," he continued, "this foundation will be run differently." Questions erupted. What changed? The day respect arrived before wealth. The changes did not happen all at once. They never do. The morning after the gala, headlines spread across business pages and social feeds alike. Some praised the bold shift in leadership. Others questioned the wisdom of stepping away from control. A few called it a publicity stunt. Richard Stanton read every word. For the first time he didn't respond. True to his promise, he stepped back. The board meetings went on without him at the head of the table. The press releases stopped carrying his name in bold. Decisions were made by people who had spent years on the ground, listening to communities instead of spreadsheets. And quietly, without cameras, without announcements, things began to change. Funding reached places it had never reached before. Schools reopened sooner. Housing approvals stopped stalling in endless review loops. Staff members who had once been ignored found their voices shaping policy. Eleanor Hale watched it all from a distance. She never took an office. Never claimed a title. She visited quietly, asked questions, listened deeply, and left behind systems that worked even when she wasn't there. One afternoon, months later, she stood outside a modest school building in East Harbor. Children poured out the front doors, laughter spilling into the street. The same little girl from the gala ran past her, backpack bouncing, face bright with excitement. Her mother followed, catching sight of Eleanor and stopping short. "You," she said softly. Eleanor smiled. "Hello." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "We moved into our new place last week. My daughter can walk to school now." Eleanor knelt and looked at the girl. "How's your classroom?" "It doesn't leak anymore," the girl said proudly. Eleanor laughed quietly. "That's excellent." As they walked away, Eleanor felt the familiar, grounding certainty return. The reminder of why she did what she did and why she never needed applause to do it. Across the city, Richard Stanton stood in the lobby of one of his newest buildings, not for a ribbon cutting but for a listening session. No stage. No microphones. Just chairs arranged in a circle. He listened as residents spoke about rent, safety, access, dignity. Some were angry. Some were hopeful. All were honest. When it was his turn to speak, he kept it brief. "I used to think leadership meant being the smartest person in the room," he said. "Now I know it means being the most accountable." There was no applause. And for the first time he knew that meant he'd said the right thing. Months later, at another gala, smaller, quieter, intentionally unremarkable, Richard arrived early. He stood near the entrance, greeting staff members by name, thanking volunteers, holding doors open. When Eleanor walked in right on time, the room noticed, not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't need it. Richard approached her with a respectful nod. "You changed my life," he said. She shook her head gently. "No, I changed your moment. You changed yourself." He smiled. "Stay?" he asked. "At least for a while." She considered him, then nodded once. "As long as we remember why we're here." They stood together as the event unfolded. No spectacle, no hierarchy, no invisible lines dividing who mattered and who didn't. Just people. Later that evening, as Eleanor prepared to leave, A young staff member stopped her. "I wanted to thank you," the woman said, "for that night." Eleanor tilted her head. "Why?" "Because I realized something," the woman replied. "Power doesn't announce itself. It listens first." Eleanor smiled. "Yes," she said. "It does." As she stepped outside, the city lights reflecting softly in the glass, Eleanor felt no need to look back. The work would continue without her. That was the point. Inside, Richard Stanton watched her go, understanding at last the lesson that had arrived disguised as disrespect. The woman who walked in late hadn't come to prove who she was. She came to show who everyone else could be.